Thank you for everyone for joining today's webinar, another one for the new year. And like we said, what we're going to be covering today is everything having to do with processing a tax return in our CrossLink 1040 software. And just as promised in the webinar description, we're going to review all the things that we see on screen right now. We're going to provide an estimation of the refund. Some people don't really know about this tool, but there is a way to create a quick estimate of the refund in the software. So we'll take a look at that. Then we'll complete a tax return, which includes depreciation, due diligence, and verifying the return for errors. We'll see how all that works. And then finally, we'll showcase a few extra features, some things that you have the opportunity to use if you wanted to this upcoming season. And that's remote signatures and the TaxPass app. Remote sign, having the taxpayer sign remotely, and using this TaxPass app website to retrieve data into your software. We'll see how all that works. Well, we're going to try to process a full return today, so let's get right into it. I'm going to go into the tax year 23 software, which of course is available to download right now. I have my program up to date to version 7, which is the version that we're at as to this date. And normally, if I was starting a return, I would just click on Add New, right, and enter the taxpayer social to start the tax return process. But instead of doing that, I do want to showcase this here, this refund calculator button. This allows you to essentially create an estimate of the refund by just entering some basic taxpayer information, some basic info that will allow you to get like an estimate of the refund, right? So let's start off by just entering in some basic information. We start off with this little picture screen allowing us to kind of set the filing status. That's what we're doing here. We're setting what type of taxpayer this is, single or married, because those two choices can definitely affect the return. And then also dependents. Let's select that they have some dependents. And now if I click on next here on the very bottom right, it'll give me the options that only apply to the things that I selected. So for this example, I'll say that it's a head of household return, especially since I selected the dependents or children. It's asking me about the taxpayer's date of birth. So let's add that. Some other questions here that, for most taxpayers, you would not select. Can they be claimed as a dependent on another return? No, this is just the primary taxpayer. And are they filing with an ITIN? No, we'll just say that we're filing with an SSN. Oh, let me try that again. There we go. Click on next. Now it's asking us about these dependents that we added or we said that they had. How many dependents under the age of 17 with SSNs? Let's say 2 of that, or actually, let's just go 1 and 1. And then other here for the earning credit, how many over the age of 18, but that are full-time students? Let's say we have one of those dependents that fit that scenario. And then next. Now we're in the income area. You can keep track of where you're at in this like interview process or this step-by-step process by looking over here to the left. Right now we're in income. But here, very important, we want to try to be as accurate as possible. If by chance, they have employment, they have a W-2, then let's type in the figures. Let's say 80K for the year, and withholding, let's say 9,000. All right. And depending on any other earnings that they may have had, you'll see here, like, let's say this W-2G for gambling earnings. They won 1,000 and paid, let's say 100 on withholding for that. And then let's say they have a small business and they have, 10,000 earnings for their small business, self-employed. Of course, you want to try to fill this out with as much information that applies to the taxpayer, because the more you fill out, the more accurate the estimate is going to be. But for now, we'll click on next. We could even do adjustments as well if they made any payments regard to medical costs, IRA deposits, things that can be, credited or that can be factored in as far as tax calculations. We can add those things. But if we click on next, I just want to get to the end of this thing. There we go. It'll show us how much the refund is going to be with the information I've entered so far with 701 here. And I could also take a look at what I'm charging this office. all the fees. In my case, I'm using like this, fake software that doesn't have a live EFIN. But in your case, if you enrolled with the bank and are providing bank products, you'll see all these pop in. So you can get a real good idea as to how much the fees are going to be for this customer as well. Not just the refund, but also how much the taxpayer is paying in fees. So one of the other things, the last thing, as far as this estimate goes, is that once you have the estimate, you could either create the return if you want to proceed with the process of completing this tax return, or you could exit out fully, and then you don't have this like fake return or this halfway completed return mixed in with your real returns. So it's a way for you to back out if you wanted to and not have to deal with like this extra information in the software that you're not going to be using. But in my case, for this example, let's say that, yeah, we do plan on creating a return. We're going to process this tax return. So I'm going to click on Create Return, and it wants to know now the taxpayer social. It didn't ask for any of that before, since we were just doing an estimate. But now, since we're doing a real return, it's wanting that info. And now it's opened up this actual tax return. This is the normal return that you would see when you open up a new return in the software. But there are some differences here. Since we did an estimate, normally, when you're starting off a brand new return, it would just start you off with the 1040, the 8879. These are like the default forms that pop in. But in our case, since we added some fees and things like that, some income, all those forms were added to the return automatically. W2, W2G for the gambling earnings, and the Schedule C here for that self-employed income. Not only that, but things like the date of birth, the filing status, that was all brought over as well. And now we just have to complete this tax return. So either way, if you're starting with the estimate or you're just starting with a blank return, a brand new return, you typically start off here on the client data. This is where you capture all the basic taxpayer, spouse, address, all that basic general information about the taxpayer that will then flow to all the forms that are added to the return. So I'm just going to type in a first name here, a last name, an occupation. Let's do the home phone. And the cell phone, that would be good if you plan on using some other tools like, for example, send text. If you want to be able to send a text through the software, we have to capture the cell phone. Also, remote sign, if you plan on capturing the taxpayer signature remotely and having them sign remotely, capturing that cell phone is important as well. Email, I'm going to type in my work email in here because I want to test this out a little bit further with you all. We'll see how that works here in a bit. And then, and related to text messaging, not only do you have to capture the cell phone, but we want to select this little box here. There's a box next to this text message that, if we look at the bottom, it says check box if customer agrees to receive text messages. So if the customer is okay getting text messages from my office, I want to select this with an X, as you can see there. It'll confirm, is it okay? Standard text messaging applies, those rates apply. So if that's okay with the taxpayer, we can proceed. And then the last thing we need is the cell phone carrier, the provider of cell phone service of the taxpayer. And we have a choices list. If you go to that field and you click on this choices button that appears towards the bottom, you'll see a list of all the federal or all the cell phone carriers within the US. You can choose whichever one applies. You could also start to type in this field. Like, instead of clicking on choices, you can just begin to type AT&T as an example, and then it'll want to auto or fill out. So that's another way. If you see a field that has choices, you can either click on choices to see the list, or you could just begin typing in, and in most cases, it'll want to auto-complete that for you. Some other stuff down here, but a lot of this stuff maybe is optional. If you select it, if it applies, including the IP PIN, which can be important if your taxpayer has an identity protection PIN. Some taxpayers, maybe they were victims of some sort of fraud or identity theft in the past, and now the IRS provides them an IEP pin, a new IEP pin every year, really. They get this in the mail. So if that's the case, if you got one of those taxpayers that have this situation going on with the IRS, then you have to make sure to include that IEP pin. It's right here, that field. But that only applies for certain taxpayers. This here, the driver's license, this is optional as well in a sense, but you can type it in. It usually helps the tax return be processed faster if you include the driver's license of the taxpayer, because they use this information to confirm, that it's really them, that all the information is accurate. So the driver's license was issued, let's say, 2022, expires 2026. Here's the little box here at the end. Sometimes it's missed, but it's just a box to identify what type of ID is this. Is it a driver's license, a state ID? You can select D for driver's license, S for state ID. They're down here. There's also N if they don't have one, or X if they didn't provide it or didn't want to provide it, because again, it is optional. But for my case, I'll choose D for driver's license. We have a head of household filing status with a number 4. But again, down below, if you're on that field, you can see what exactly the program wants from you, what it's expecting for you to type in these fields. The spouse information doesn't even apply because we're doing a head of household return, so we're going to skip all that. And then type in the address. Customer's address, we'll just type in some fake information there. We also have some military conflict information. If the taxpayer was involved in a military conflict, you can select the appropriate one here and select the date of service and all that, or enter in the date of service. We have some bank account info. This is important if you want them to do a direct deposit of the refund, or expect them that they'll be doing direct deposit. You have the banks that you've entered in the past in the software. If you're brand new to CrossLink, this will be blank the first year typically, but as you use the program, every time you enter in a new bank for a new customer, it's going to pop in that information, or it's going to save it to the choices so that it can be popped into the return. And if you want to look at this list of choices, or maybe edit them, modify them somehow, all these choices list, or I should say the majority of the choices list, are available under the database menu. This database menu on the top left, they're typically all tied to a whole bunch of different choices lists that you find in the software. In the case of the bank, we're talking about this option here, bank and routings. Those are all my banks, and I can choose to edit one if I need to make a change. I can add them manually or delete them if I want to get rid of it from the list. Just as a heads up, but in most cases, people just let them accumulate there. Here is the account number that we have to confirm and what type of account it is, checking, savings. Referral, this is more optional. If you want to capture this information, you can, but this is how the customer heard of your business, how they were referred to your office. And if I click on choices here, I've got my little list of options. This is one that when you're brand new to the software, it's going to be blank. You have to build this list yourself, but you can do that again by going to database. Here's the referrals option. And then here, it wants to know a sequence number. It's like a number representing this referral, and it can really be whatever you want. In my case, I'm just going down this numerical list. So let's just choose 006 for my next one. And then click on add. And then this is where you would type, what really is the referral that we're talking about. So in my case, looking at my list, let's say for this season, I added radio announcements. I made some ads for radio, and I want to track how that's working. So now, if I go to my referral option, I got my radio. And then if I want, I can also type in some, additional information. I can type in like the station that they heard it from or something like that. And then later on, outside of the return in the reports area, I can run a report and kind of like see all this information in one area. See like all the returns, the total amounts of returns that came in due to radio, if you find that information useful. But if not, again, it is optional in most cases. You can leave that blank. Same thing with the marketplace health insurance. This only applies if the taxpayer purchased their health insurance through the marketplace. If that's the case, you can select this with a box and then click this questionnaire button. That'll take you to the questionnaire to use or to fill out using the 1095-A that they got in the mail. But if they have their health insurance through a private health insurance company or through their employer, then you would not select that. This used to be more important back in the day, but now it's just an indicator, and it's only used if they purchased their health insurance through the marketplace. Whether it's full year coverage or partial year coverage, that's when you would select this box and complete the questionnaire. But working our way further down this client data, this is the dependents area. So let's enter in this first child, last name, a birth date of, let's say, 2012. That works. The social, the relationship, I can start typing in what type of relationship this dependent is with the taxpayer. S for son, D for daughter. And then also, and there's a bunch more. You can click on choices if you want to see those other options. Amount of months that the dependent live with the taxpayer. If they live the full year with the taxpayer, you can type in 12. Otherwise, you can type in whatever is appropriate. You could also type in CN for Canada or MX for Mexico if the dependent lived outside of the US for the year. And then we have some codes that popped in automatically. We have this number 1 here, and this represents, if I take a look at my choices down here, it represents that the dependent lived with the taxpayer for the full year. And that's because I entered 12 months. It popped in that code. Makes sense. But if you need to make changes, if adjustments need to be made to this, you can. Same thing with this EIC code for eligibility. With the information I've entered so far, this dependent is eligible for EIC, the age and the relationship and the social. But there's also other options in here for S for student, D for disabled, K for kidnapped, and so on. And then another code that pops in is the eligibility for the child tax credit. We have that information here as well, but there are other options too. You have this other blank box over here that has to do with Form 2441, dependent care. This is just a shortcut to add the 2441. If you place an X there, it'll add that form. So I'll go ahead and do that so we can see that. You'll notice that when I press an X, it didn't add the form just yet. I don't see that form, but the adding of the forms and the recalculation of the return, that happens once you leave a page. Like if I were to go to the 1040, jump to that form, that's when the 2441 would pop in. Or if I just click on refresh button, there you go. It pops in the 2441. It readjusts the return with all the information I've entered so far. And then finally, this state box. This box is all about entering in certain state codes that could apply for certain state residents. You can click on choices as well to kind of see some of these options that are special for certain states. Okay? If you don't live in these states, then you don't have to worry about that. Let's enter in another dependent. And what would be a good age for this one? Let's say 2005. Yeah, that works. I just want to create a little bit of an older dependent. This one is 18 years old because we're going to classify this one as a student. There we go. All right, so now we filled out, well, actually before we finish this dependence or this client data screen, I do want to take a look at the very bottom. Some of these options may cause a little bit of confusion when you're new to the software. And some of this stuff may not be visible to you. It depends on what services you've enrolled with. Like, for example, in my case, I have this audit insurance called Audit Allies available as one of the optional services that I enrolled in. This is done on the CrossLink Tax website. And it's asking whether or not I want to provide this service, this Audit Allies, to my customer. So if the customer wants this audit protection, this audit insurance that covers an insurance audit, if it were to occur to this taxpayer, I could enroll. But otherwise, if the taxpayer does not want this service, we can select N there for no if that's the case. Selecting Y, by the way, all it would do is just add that form. There's the Audit Allies form that was added to the tax return by selecting Y here. And now that service is added to the tax return. As a matter of fact, we could just leave it there. We'll say that this taxpayer does want that. And another thing that they may want is remote sign. If they want to be able to capture their signature remotely to sign for this return, we have to select that yes, they're okay with getting text message or getting using remote sign to sign their information remotely. And then I also have the option, do you want to include the remote signature charge on the invoice? The remote sign does have a cost to you, the office, of $5 for completed remote signature requests. This is per taxpayer. And if you want to pass along this $5 charge to the taxpayer so that you can recoup that money, then you can leave this with a Y for yes. But it is optional. You can choose N there for no, and then the invoice will not include that extra $5 fee being charged to the taxpayer. You'll still be charged as the office. The office will still be charged the $5, but the taxpayer will not. But in my case, let's say again that, yeah, I want to recover that money. I don't necessarily want to lose $5, so I'll add that to the invoice and get that from the taxpayer. Okay, so now we're at a better spot when it comes to this client data. We filled out all the information that applies so far. There may be things that are missing, especially when you're brand new. You may think that, oh man, I don't know if I've completed all this fully. Well, that's okay. We'll come back to that with the verify process. We'll see how that works here in a bit. But for now, we're just going to move forward. I know that this return they have, or this taxpayer, they have income, right, from a W-2. It's already added here because I did the estimate. But if not, if you were starting fresh, just click on Add Form, and there's the W-2. You can add that form manually to the tax return. I'm going to go to the W-2 that already exists in the return instead of adding another one. And there we go. Here's the W-2 with the information that I already entered in here for the wages and the withholding at least. And I just need to complete some stuff like the employer identification number. This is another one where every time I enter in a new one, the software is going to save it so I can use it for future use. Let's say for this taxpayer, they work here at this place, and just to fill out all that information for me. The customer's name and address, that's all being pulled in from the client data, so we don't even have to worry about that. There are some other things that you may want to keep an eye out for in the W-2. For example, like any of these special codes that may appear on line 13 or line 12. Typically has to do with like retirement, but it's just there's a whole bunch of different codes here. Let me see if I can show you that. Yeah, all these different types of codes that may apply, for the taxpayer. And what you want to do basically is just copy that W-2. You have that paper W-2 in front of you, and you have this one, this electronic version, and you're just, moving data around. You want to copy the data that's on that paper W-2 exactly as it is here on this electronic version, including any state information down below. Right now, we're a bit too early in the season, so a lot of states, they're not going to be available. Keep that in mind when it comes to the software. As a matter of fact, let me see if I try to add a California as an example. It's loading California, and yeah, this is what you'll see most common, that it's not released yet because the state forms aren't available just yet. But you keep on transmitting with the software, you'll get those updates, especially now that I've added this state to the return. Now the software knows that it wants California, is looking for this state package. So every time you transmit, it's going to see if that state package is available, and it'll download it automatically. You just have to install the update. We'll take a look at that once we get back to the work in progress. But for now, I've completed all the information that I wanted to add for this W-2, right? It's just basic wages and withholding. Let's say they don't have anything else extra or separate. a matter of fact, I'm going to get rid of this California just to get rid of that. And I'm going to remove this state just to not complicate ourselves. And to do that, if you're curious, some people don't know how to remove or delete a form. Right-click on the form from attached forms, and then click on either remove state in the case of the state or remove form as well. That is an option. There we go. So we got our W-2. Let's do our W-2G real quick. This was the gambling earnings. So let's say that we got a casino here. I think I have a casino as part of my, yeah, there it is, Moneymaker Casino. Let's choose that one. And let's fill out some information here. When it was won. This was year first? No. Okay. And then I'm going to leave it at that for now. Let's see if the verify finds anything that may be missing. I'm pretty sure it will. Let's take a look at this Schedule C. Schedule C is when they have self-employment, they have a small business, whether it's an actual, brick and mortar business or they're just running it from home. In most cases, we're going to be using the Schedule C. So let's say that they have a landscaping business on the side that they do on the weekends. When it comes to the business code, if you know the business code, you can type it in. There's also choices here that you can scan through. Or sometimes if you know the name of the code, you can go to this field over here where it shows you the name of the category or business type that they're in, and you can start typing that in. There we go. And like in my case, I know that there's a code for landscaping services. So if I start typing in landscaping services, it'll pop in the code. Just another way that you can use this to fill this out, because I know that there is a big list of all these different types of businesses that exist out there. Business name is if they have an official name for their business, a sign outside their business that has their business name outside. If not, if it's like a home business and they don't really have an official name or anything like that, you can leave it blank, and it'll just use the name that we typed up here. As far as this is another one where depending on the business address, if it's a home business, you can select this little box, check box to transfer CDS address. What's that? What's happening here is transferring the client data screen. That's what CDS stands for, the client data. So if that applies, if it is a home business and they're just using their home address, you can select this box to populate it. And this box to transfer information from the CDS, this appears in different areas throughout the tax return. Keep an eye out for it. It'll help filling out information just go by faster. After that, the accounting method, in most cases, it is cash that they're using. And they are also, this one here, this qualified business income indicator. In most cases, yes, they are qualified. There's only a few special instances of businesses that do not qualify for this. It's like something like athletes and certain lawyers. If you review this information online, you'll find the list. It's not many. And then income, gross income or sales. Let's say they did the 10,000. Some information like the W-2 info that we did for the estimate, that transfers over. Some stuff does not, and we have to type it in. Something that could occur with businesses is depreciation. This is line 13. I'm going to come back to that piece because in most cases, you do not want to type in information onto these fields directly, even though it is a blue field. You notice that this is a kind of a light blue color, while other fields, like these ones over here, are more gray. Typically, when we're talking about blue fields like these, those allow you to type in information directly onto the field. You can just type in the amount directly on here, and the software will calculate it. If we're talking about these gray fields, on the other hand, these are usually fields that are being calculated by the software. The program is populating that information. You're not coming in here and typing information in yourself. Technically, you could go in here into a field and type it in, and it'll say, oh, wait, you're going to override this with the amount entered in. and you'll see it'll show up in yellow there, or in kind of like orange, indicating that the field has been overridden with information. And the software allows you to do this because maybe in some rare instances your calculations are correct and the software is not. But in most cases, you don't want to do that. In most cases, you want to clear that override if you happen to have one. Let the software do the calculations for you, and that'll keep everything accurate and in accordance with IRS regulations. But I mention all that to say when it comes to depreciation, you probably don't want to enter in your information directly onto here. The reason why is because different items can be calculated at different depreciation rates, depending on what type of item it is, depending on how old the item is. So to make this process easier, or to really organize all these different assets that may be depreciating for a business, you'd want to go to either the depreciation option over here to the left, or you can click on Add Form. There's also Depreciation tab up top. Either way, they take you here to this area. This area was where you can start depreciating items that are going to be associated with a form. I'm sorry, give me 1 second. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, I'm sorry. I think I encountered an issue where it's not popping up the Schedule C that I added in my software. This may be due to like missing update or something like that. But I did want to point out, like once you add a form that's added to the tax return that supports asset depreciation, it'll pop up under this depreciation area. And then you also find here this car and truck. This is if you're doing car or truck depreciation, especially if you're doing actual expenses. If you want to capture how much the car actually had in expenses and factor that in for depreciation, instead of using the standard mileage rate for a vehicle depreciation, you could use this. Otherwise, on the Schedule C, if we scroll all the way down, information for your vehicle, that's where you can do just the standard mileage depreciation, more straightforward than actual expenses. But going back, let me go back to that depreciation area. There's my Schedule C. Well, there's the new schedule I see I added. I apologize, but we're going to add an asset. It works the same way. We're going to add an asset to this Schedule C. Let's say it was a chair that they purchased for their business. When they purchased it, that's important to factor in as well. You want to type in the date in which they started using it for their business. I'll just say that they started it in the beginning of the year. And then what type of asset is this? Because this affects how long the asset is being depreciated, how long it's being depreciated, what the different time frames are, what the calculations are going to be. It all depends on what type of thing you're depreciating. So in the case of a chair, furniture and fixtures, right? Pretty straightforward. Here I can type in how much I paid for this chair that I'm using for my business. Let's say it was a pricey one at $500. And then that's typically it. That's really what you want to factor in. There is a depreciation tab up here if you want to see how things are being calculated or maybe make some adjustments for prior year stuff. But if it's a new asset, you can close this. It's going to ask us here if we want to elect out of special bonus depreciation. This is this depreciation that allows you to take the depreciation in 1 year versus splitting it between the lifespan of this asset. As an example, like let's say checkbox, or I'll elect out of this depreciation just so you can see what it looks like. Let me go to this Schedule C. There we go. So now we have a depreciation of $72 because it's splitting that cost. If I were to go back, and let me just modify this bonus depreciation. I'm going to remove that. I already see how it changed back here, but now let me go back to that Schedule C. Notice the difference, right? So it's the full depreciation in one go versus the split or carried over depreciation year after year. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how you can start adding assets to forms and depreciating those forms. Like if I had to add another one, I can just go into that Schedule C again, click on New Asset, start adding that particular item. Let's add another one just real quick. Let's say they got a PC placed in service on that date. It's a computer, so we'll choose that. 2000, pricey computer, but okay. Close. You could access that bonus depreciation area with this button here if you wanted to. But it also it pops up automatically when you first add the asset. This is another one I'll say I like out of bonus depreciation, even though I would think in most cases you wouldn't. Most taxpayers I would say prefer to have the bonus depreciation. And then there we are. It's factoring it into that depreciation area. The two items calculating separate depreciation calculations are being totaled up in this area. That's why you don't want to like do the math yourself and try to add it yourself, because there's a whole bunch of math behind the scenes that's happening. The vehicle, though, if you're adding or using that standard mileage rate, you can go here, type it directly when the vehicle was placed in service, let's say February of this last year. How many miles total? Let's say 25K. How many commuting miles? Because those do not, or excuse me, enter the number of miles used for the business. My apologies. This would be for the business miles. Let's say 20. And then commuting. This does not calculate. They cannot claim these miles. So that's what I wanted to do. 20 and then 5 for 25K total. Even though, a vehicle, they may have more miles. I'm just using a very basic calculation here. And then some questions that we have to answer. Was this vehicle available off duty? So like if it was a personal vehicle, most likely yes, they use it for personal use as well. Do you have evidence to support your deduction? You're supposed to have evidence for all these types of depreciation, whether it's like the mileage, or of course, if they're doing actual expenses, then you definitely want to have all that written. And now if I scroll up, there's my car and truck expenses being calculated to this one. All right, so there's a quick rundown or a run through of the Schedule C. Of course, the Schedule C can be more complex than that. This is just a very basic employment and vehicle depreciation. But if you search for the Schedule C instructions, it'll give you a breakdown on the IRS website. It gives you instructions, and there's plenty of online resources as well if you do need more information about this. But for now, let's just keep going because I know we're running out of time, and I do want to finish this return. I'm on the 2441 right now, and I'm entering in the care provider information. I'm saying that no, this is not a household employee, and let's say I paid $6,000 for the whole year, probably very cheap overall, but $6,000 for the whole year of childcare. And now let's say that, I filled out this return with all the information that I can think of. I think I'm done with this tax return. One of the final steps, especially if you have a refund, I can see right here on the left that I have a refund of $5,401 with the information that I've entered so far. That's my kind of estimated refund amount. And if I go to my 8879, this is how I can choose how the taxpayer is going to get their refund. I can say it's a check from the IRS being mailed to them with a number 1, a direct deposit from the IRS, if I'm doing that, or if I'm enrolled to provide bank products and the taxpayer wants to use a bank product, then I can choose option 5 here. If I choose option 5, what'll happen, especially after I refresh or go to a different form, is that the bank app form is going to pop in automatically here. In my case, again, my EFIN is not activated for bank products, so this bank app form is not popping in automatically. You would also be able to search for bank form, and it pops up here as part of the available forms as bank app. That's where you finalize the bank product return, where you select how the customer is going to get their bank product, whether it's a a check that you print out, a direct deposit, a card, an advance, if they want to get an advance on the refund amount, all that is available on that bank app form. And that's if you're enrolled to provide bank products. In my case, for this example, I'll just say that we're using a direct deposit from the IRS direct. Okay, so now I've added that refund type method. If I'm using the software to charge the taxpayer for tax preparation services, then in that case, I may want to take a look at the invoice as well. This is where all those tax preparation fees, your tax preparation fees, are being calculated into the return, along with any additional things that I've selected, like the audit protection. I added that form, so that means the cost for audit protection is being popped in automatically to the cost of that tax return. And by the way, some folks have a question about this. If I have audit protection in a return and I want to get rid of it, then it's all tied to the form. If the form is added, then the cost and the service is added. If it's not added, well, then the service and the cost is removed. So if you want to get rid of that, you can remove the form. And now if I go back to my invoice, the cost is gone, but of course the service is gone as well. Here's my total of all the amount of what I'm charging my taxpayer. Pretty big, but that's because I've set up my billing with some prices. Oh, I see that Schedule C is pretty pricey. These are the fees that I've factored in or I've entered into my software. You can modify these fees or your fees, right? This is all set under setup and billing setup. And some of this is optional too. Some folks, they don't even enter in prices per form. What they do is they manually just type in the price here. At the top of the invoice, you have the area to type in, what you're going to charge the taxpayer. I can say that it's tax prep. There you go. In my case, it's adding it on to everything that's being charged. But if you didn't have any itemized fees, then in that case, it would just factor this in. Same thing with discounts down below. If I want to type in a discount, I can just type that in and say, let me give this person a significant discount of $2,000. And then now it's, factoring that in to the total cost, just $552. And some people, they turn off this invoice completely. This is optional in a sense. If you want to not use the invoice for tax return payment tracking, you can do that by going into setup, billing setup. There is an option in there to disable invoicing as well, if you're not interested. Now, we're kind of wrapping up with this return. Let's see if we have any errors that we have to complete. And I'm pretty sure we are going to have one. Let's click on this verify option. And yeah, look at all these errors that have popped up. They seem like a lot, but I'm going to go through these quickly. It's not too difficult to clear errors because the program is going to take you, in most cases, to the exact form and field that's causing the issue. So this first one, it has to do with the client data. It is a warning. You'll notice that there are differences here. There's fatal errors and there's warnings. Warnings allow me to continue on with the return if I wanted to print it, transmit it, queue it. Warnings will allow me to do that, even though it's not recommended. We do recommend that you clear out all the warnings. Fatal errors, those I have to fix in order to really finish this return. In order to print it, transmit it, I gotta clear this error. So let's go through it. This first one takes me to this information and status page. This page over here, information and status. This error or this warning has to do with the sign 8879. This is kind of like a reminder to make sure that you're going to be signing the 8879. One thing I can do, especially if, this is a warning that may pop up that probably is going to pop up for all returns. And I could, in my case, I know that I'm going to capture that signature. I don't need this reminder. If that's the case, for not only this field, but a whole bunch of other fields in the software, you can basically complete that field with an X in this case, right? And then right-click on the field and then choose Set Default Value. What this will do is it'll basically set this with an X for this field for all returns. You're kind of like preloading the return or all returns moving forward with this selection. So keep that in mind. If there are some fields that you think that you may want to autocomplete and have it filled out automatically, you can, in most cases, set it the way you want it, and then click on Set Default Value after clicking right-clicking the field. Be aware, though, there are some fields that you may not want to do this. You know, that some people may be tempted to, oh, I'll just set everything to auto reload or auto set. But keep in mind, you know, some things may be appropriate for one taxpayer versus another. Here's a question just like that. Did this taxpayer have any purchases or selling of cryptocurrency? This is informational for now, but the IRS wants to know yes or no for this question. You may be tempted to add a set default value here, which it allows it, but you know, maybe you do want that reminder just to make sure that you're following IRS regulations and entering accurate info, right? As a tax preparer, that's one of the things that we have to do. Here's another one. This is new for this new season. This is on the Schedule C, and it has to do with new businesses. Businesses that are LLCs or classified as corporations. They have to, in accordance to new IRS regulations, they have to report with the FinCEN, this department called FinCEN, or that's their not nickname, but their kind of shorter name. They have to file with them. And this is a reminder to basically let the taxpayer know, or to inform them that, hey, if this is a new business made after January 1st, 2024, they have 30 days to report with the FinCEN to do this report. And there's some information available about this online and also on our What's New webinar that's on YouTube. If that's for new businesses, if they're older businesses pre-January 1st, 2024, then they have a year. So there's still time for those types. But if they're new, they have to get that done in 30 days, basically. All right, but we're working our way down these errors, just going down. So far, it's been like a lot of just press X to confirm. This one, what was this? Verify invalid routing number. Oh, okay. This is my fake routing number that I typed in there. Let me try a different one. I'm going to go to the client data actually to make that correction. Okay, it's not liking it. In that case, for this one, I may have to ignore it. It is a fatal one. Okay. Dang, hold on. Let me see if I can figure one out real quick. Or how about one of these other banks? There we go. Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. In my case, you probably would encounter that unless you're using an incorrect routing number. Routing numbers are specific numbers that, you know, we know there's like a specific range, so it has to be correct. So here's that qualified. This has to do with that new. I'm going to remove that extra Schedule C that I added. $24.41 is not complete. Let's take a look at why. Oh, the expenses. All right, so yeah, let's type in qualifying. Oh yeah, this is one where the expenses having to do with the dependent care, in regard to like the credit for child and dependent care expenses. So here I can say, for example, that I spent $6,000 again for this dependent and associated with the dependent care. As far as the credit goes, it could only be up to $3,000. Even though I typed in $6,000, the dependent is only factoring in $3,000 of that $6,000 for the credit. That's in accordance with, you know, IRS regulations for this credit. But I just wanted to point that out. And now we can move forward. Oh, we're kind of wrapping up here. The only thing we have left are all these things having to do with the 8867. If I double click on this, it takes me to the 8867, and it has to do with these questions to make sure that the information is accurate. You know, these credits that have to do with dependents, the IRS wants to make sure that this is, you know, valid, that they're not just claiming these credits when it does not apply. So that's why we have these questions that we have to go through. But I did want to point out that as you work your way, especially through the verify, you can allow the verify to take you to each one of these questions. It'll also take you to the yes or no to calculate the credit. Of course, this is another thing you want to answer accurately, right? Like in the case of this question, it took me to know because that's the answer that has to be selected for the credit, but you're answering this with the taxpayer, and you're answering it as it should be applied or answered with the accurate information. But I'm just showing you as, using my tab and X to mark it, I can go through these these verify errors pretty quickly. Here, it landed me on letter B to confirm how the dependent is actually living with the taxpayer. So like this is to confirm like my proof that yeah, this dependent is living with the taxpayer, and I know that because of. And it took me till the letter B, the verify, but other things may apply. This really does depend on the taxpayer. What else do we have here? This has to do with just documentation of, to make sure that the information that I've entered is accurate. This having to do with the Schedule C. So I'll say that, yeah, I've got some records here that I verified. One last one, proving head of household for this dependent. It took me to the letter I, but again, depending on what the taxpayer has, what they're showing you as proof, you would choose whichever is appropriate. And there we are. Now we're at a more decent spot when it comes to the tax return, all verified, and we're ready to proceed with the last steps of working with this return. And usually that's printing the return, that's queuing the return, getting it ready to be e-filed. To print this tax return, if I'm just printing out the final version of the return, I can click on this print button here. This will print out the final version of the tax return the way I've set it in my setup and printer setup. That's where you can set what is being printed out. If you're doing a bank document or bank product, you may have to, or you most likely will need to print the bank documents first. You can do that by going to print bank documents. Then you'll be allowed to print the final return. You have to print these first and capture those signatures first. And speaking of capturing signatures, when you're inside of print, before I actually print out this return, the software does allow you to capture signatures, whether it's right away with the Sign Doc button. This allows me to sign using my computer's mouse, touchscreen, electronic signature pads. It depends on how you configured your software, but all those are supported methods. And when you're capturing right away with the mouse pad or signature pad or touchscreen, whatever, these signatures do not have an extra cost associated with them. I can open these up or accept them. Usually what happens is a PDF of the return pops up with all the signatures in place. And then I can print this out if I want to, or in my document archive, it's storing that copy there as well. So that's if you're capturing signatures right away. But if you want to do remote sign, that's one thing I did want to mention. This remote sign button is what that's about. If I click on remote sign, here it's asking me if I want to capture any signatures right now. This can be useful if you have a tax return with a taxpayer and spouse, and only one person is in front of you, and the other person is going to be signing remotely. Well, that's when this comes. In my case, I can only see the taxpayer option because this is just a head of household return. But if it was a married filing joint, I'd see two, and I can select the person that's going to be signing right away, signing with the signature pad or touchscreen, signing right now, and then the other person would sign remotely. This can cause a little bit of confusion because some people think, when I'm going to do remote sign for this taxpayer, okay, yeah, I'm going to select this because the taxpayer is wanting to sign remotely. It's the opposite, actually. If the taxpayer wants to sign remotely, leave it unselected because this means to sign right now. Hopefully that made sense. But again, leave it unselected if the person is signing remotely. Click OK. And then now I get to select how the taxpayer is going to sign. In my case, let's use this email option. Click OK. And what's happening is that the taxpayer is being sent an email to sign remotely. This email option, it does require a little bit of configuration in the software. You have to tie a Gmail account with your software. So just be aware of that. The texting option does not typically require configuration. You can start using that right away as long as you've captured their cell phone right, all that stuff on the client data. That's important. But now let me take a quick look at my email here. There we go. This is what you, oh, sorry, let me open this up. This is what you can expect, or what your taxpayers can expect to receive when you send a request via email. It's basically a very kind of like basic email asking them to review and sign the documentations. It'll include the name of your tax office. And then if I click on that, it takes them to this web page. The taxpayer does have to kind of like confirm who they are. They have to do like a verification process to keep it secure. So I'm just going to want to look at my return real quick because I don't remember exactly. Where is it? Sorry, not that one. There you go. So here, it wants to know the last name. Last name is last. The date of birth. And, this has to match whatever you have in the return. It cannot be different. Last four of the social, 3333. And then the zip code that we have for the address. This one right here, 98109. So there we go. Now I filled out all the information matching what we have in the return, and we can click on next. If they get an error before they get to this part, if they get a message saying it does not match, then we just have to confirm that they're entering the information correctly. Also, for Spanish-speaking customers, make sure that they're not using any special characters like an E with an accent. That can happen sometimes if they have their keyboard set to Spanish. And here we go. Now there's the tax return. This is the taxpayers look. This is like, this is what the taxpayers experience. So they can save this to the device if they want to. They can also click on yes, assuming that everything is okay. Now the taxpayer is going to sign. So we're going to click on OK here. We're going to sign using, again, mouse or touchscreen. Most people are doing this on their phone, so they'll be able to sign in this box. If they're using their PC, well, then they have to sign with their mouse or touchscreen. And then, yeah, I like my signature. Things are looking good. Yes, sign electronically. There we are. So now, if I go back to my tax return, this taxpayer signed, right? They did everything they had to do on their side. Usually this process is very quick. And if I go to my document archive, there it is. This last copy right here, created a few minutes ago, signed full return. There's my signature in place, like I did on the website. So that's, I'm done with this return as far as capturing signatures. It's documented as well. If I wanted to send a copy, I can email a copy to the taxpayer directly from here, by the way. But again, that does require a little bit of configuration. If you need help with that, our support department can help you. But we are done with this return. We're going to click on Q to get this transmitted. That's the last step. Typically, when you want to e-file this return, you want to queue it. This gets the return ready to be e-filed. It's going to show you what exactly is going to be queued or ready to be e-filed. And if you had any states, they would also show up here. I'll click on, right now I'm just sending the federal. That's the only thing I see. And when I click on queue, you'll notice that the return has closed automatically. The return is locked to prevent any further changes being made to the return. And it's also queued, meaning the status of the return says return queued, meaning that the return is just kind of sitting, waiting to be e-filed. If I open this return again, it tells me the return is locked. And if I try to make any changes, I'm trying to change the first name or whatever, it doesn't allow me because the program thinks that this return is done. You're not supposed to be making changes. You can, though. If you change your mind and you need to make a change before you send it off, you can unlock this return by opening up the return menu, lock, unlock towards the very bottom, or Control-Shift-U if you're into your keyboard shortcuts. That will unlock or lock the return depending on, if it's locked or unlocked. But for my example, I'm just going to leave it queued. This return is good. The last thing I want to do, if I really want to send this off, is transmit. This transmit with the software. In my case, I have my software configured to show me all the returns that are queued automatically. And I can see right there, there's my customer waiting to be e-filed. If I close this little filter, what I was looking at there was this filter button or filter window. It shows me all the stuff that's waiting. And from here, I can remove it if I want to remove it from the queue, or I can deselect it or unselect it if I want to like transmit with the software without e-filing or sending this return. That can be useful, like if I want to receive updates in the software. I don't want to transmit the return. Like as an example, I can see that we just got one. If I want to transmit with the software, not send this return that's queued, but I want to keep it in the queue overall. If I go back to my transmit, there's that return still waiting there because I just temporarily unselected it. If I want to remove it, that's when it gets rid of the return and I would have to re-queue it if I want to transmit. But assuming that I do want to transmit the return, leave it selected and then just click on transmit. Once I click on transmit here, that's when the return will be sent off. It'll be e-filed. Again, as we mentioned earlier, the IRS opens this season for the 29th of January, so expect to receive acknowledgments after that date. But between then though, if you do transmit a return, it'll just be waiting here, waiting for the IRS to be open. If it has an advance request, obviously that'll be processed a little bit differently with the bank. But that is the final step as far as transmitting that tax return. Now, one last thing before we wrap up there, I know we're running a little bit late, but I did want to mention this TaxPass retrieval. Some folks don't really use this tool, and it is optional. You don't have to use it if you don't need it. But if you are interested in this, this TaxPass is essentially a website that you can log into, or really your customers log into, taxpassapp.com. And your customer is going to basically register to use this app, and it will allow them to send you information to your software, send you data that will be imported into the return, like all that client data, W-2, like the stuff that we did for the estimate. A lot of that stuff can be received by the taxpayer using this website. Once they register to use this app, they can log in. Registering means like, setting a password, very straightforward stuff. But once they register and log in, then they can come in here and basically send you the data. Let me see. This one, unfortunately, was already created or submitted, so I can't like go in and edit it. But here's an example of the information that they can fill out: their social, name, birthdays, driver's license, their occupation, all that's a lot of the fields that you see on the client data. They're fields here that the taxpayer can fill out, and it will transfer over into the software. I'm sorry, it can be hard to see, but we're looking at like bank routing numbers, what type of bank account, even the referral type, that can be captured here. The documents, they can upload documents that'll be added to the tax return, pictures of their W-2, pictures of a whole bunch of stuff here, 1099s, IDs. They can all add that, and it'll be available in the software. And they can even send you messages as well, I believe, through this may be disabled for now, but there is a message option here to send you messages through the app to your software. And then once they add all this information, the last step is to submit the info. There's a button here to submit the information. There's like a button towards the bottom here to submit. And then once they submit information, you can go into your software and retrieve it through this TaxPass retrieval. Here's an example. There's that taxpayer, right, that was submitted. If I open this up, it'll like transfer the tax return to the software. And then now I can open this up, and in my case, it already exists. I'm going to skip it now so you can see what it looks like. But there you go. Here's the information that was processed, that was brought over from the TaxPass app. In my case, maybe not too much, but keep in mind that the more they fill out, just like the estimator, the more the taxpayer fills out on that app, on that website, the more information will transfer over into the return. And any documents that they may have attached to this tax return would also appear in this document archive. So a useful tool, especially if maybe you have taxpayers that are outside of the state that want to send you information. Some people even do it for or even use it from tax preparers. If they're on the road and they want to be able to send something into the software, they'll do this on behalf of the customer and kind of like build this online portal for the taxpayer's return. It's kind of like what this TaxPass app website is supposed to be. But with that said, I know we've covered a lot today. If you need some help with any of this stuff that I've mentioned, as far as like TaxPass, email, setting up billing, printing options, of course, you're welcome to let us know. Our support department is available right now to address those types of concerns before the IRS or before the season really officially begins.